Hello everyone, this is Taryn with Wonderfully Made Handcrafting, and today we're working through day 5 of By the Wall for God's famous last words. So since we're talking about the thieves on the cross today, I decided I really wanted to use the last will and testament stamp and stamp this little last will out, and I will end up adding the verse that one of the thieves said to Jesus before he passed away. So that verse is Luke 23:42, where the one thief says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." But we see a couple verses back, the other thief says, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." And we see two contrasting positions with these thieves. And Judy writes in the devotional, "While these two men's last words certainly apply for salvation, what lesson can we who have trusted in Christ pull from this account? Do we come to Christ for earthly benefit only? Calling on him to fix this, get me out of this, make my life comfortable? Or do we plead for mercy and grace in order to align with his kingdom purposes?" And so I put that little note on the label, kind of shortened it a little bit, but I thought that was such a profound statement from Judy that I really wanted to include that on this page. So now that I have my notes all down, I'm going to work on this layering cluster. And I know that I want to use florals for this page. I love these florals. I just haven't been able to use them yet in a page. And I'm trying to figure out where I want them placed, and also if I want one bunch or two. Now, what I've found is that if you use the same scaled size florals, it kind of looks the best. And so I'm actually going to change these florals out on the top left-hand corner. But before I do that, I start working on my background. Now I just took out my Distress Oxide and frayed burlap in my makeup brush, and I'm layering down a light, even layer on this page. Now this is my go-to color. I use this for everything. If you've watched any of my videos, I probably should own stock in just this color. But I love using it for backgrounds because it creates this antique kind of vintage feel. And also I use it on the edges of ephemera pieces to kind of bring everything together. And so if you don't have this color yet, definitely go pick it up. I end up taking out my vintage fabric background stamp from By the Wall for God. I will link it down below because it is an amazing background stamp. And so I end up using it with some Versa Fine Vintage Sepia color. Now this color I decided to stamp off first and do a second generation stamping. But after a couple of tries, I decided I really like the detail it gives you with the first stamp. And so I end up stamping it all first generation, but then it looks really dark and heavy. So you'll see how I fix that in a second. Now to get all the detail and precision with this background stamp, I highly suggest using a Versa Fine ink. They're the best ink for getting all the nooks and crannies and details of stamps, and you're not going to get that same look with the Distress Oxide or StazOn ink. Now that's not to say don't use those inks, it's just if you want the detail, definitely go with Versa Fine. So here's the important part. Here's where I knock back some of that dark brown color. I end up taking out my Distress Spray Stain in White Picket Fence, and I'm going to paint that over the background. Now what's great about the spray stain is that it doesn't take away the color at all. It just knocks it back a little bit. So you're not going to lose any color, and you're not going to lose any of the definition or detail to the background stamp. So you'll still see that peeking out behind. It's just not going to overtake your page like it was. It's not going to take away from the cluster. And what's also great about it is that it goes on so smoothly and gives such a wonderful finish. It's way better than using white acrylic paint to knock back a page. Another thing that's great with the Distress Spray Stain is that once it's dry, you don't see any brush strokes, and that's not the case with acrylic paint. So another great reason to use the Distress Spray Stain. I've grabbed out my Daniel Smith watercolors from the kit, and I'm going to use this olive green to add some splatters to the background. This will just help carry your eye around the page and add another element to this mixed media background. Now, if you're a little worried about splattering paint and worried that you can't control it, I would highly suggest picking up the stamp set Lindsey Splatters from By the Wall for God. It is a stamp set of paint splatters, and so you can use that with ink and get the same look in your backgrounds. I'll try to link that stamp set down below, but now I'm back to working on my cluster, and I'm having a little bit of difficulties because I don't have a good place for this label. because the witness on the bottom of this last will and testament is all the way at the bottom, and I really want to keep that scene because it says Jesus on the bottom, and so I don't want to lose that, and so it makes it a little hard to layer other things on top of it. So since I'm having a little bit of difficulty figuring that out, I decide just to move on to the next step. That's oftentimes what I end up doing if I'm struggling somewhere. I just kind of move on because that way I'm just not sitting around trying to figure something out. And oftentimes doing the next thing actually helps me figure out how I want that other thing to look. And so I grab the Matthews Alpha that is from By the Wall for God, and I stamp it out. It is a great typewriter font that's nice and bold. And I'm going to kind of fill it in with some frayed burlap because I didn't stamp it perfectly. But what I didn't think of is that the Versa Fine ink has a little bit of difficulty drying on this page right away instantly because of the distress spray stain in the background. I should have taken like a heat tool to it. So I kind of trying to fill it in with some frayed burlap and then kind of blotting it off. But instead it kind of takes up the ink. And I actually really like that look. It makes it look imperfect and kind of grunges it up a little bit, which I actually was like a happy accident for me. So since I'm still not sure how I am doing this cluster, I decide I'm going to just distress the outside of all my ephemera pieces. This is something that I do with almost every page. I don't necessarily like the white edges of stuff, and I like to add some definition and like aging to pieces. And so using just a makeup brush on the edge of these pieces absolutely helps to kind of complete and finish off the look of an ephemera piece. So since I don't have a ton of writing on this last will and testament, it looked a little empty. So here I am creating little coffee mug stains on this. Now I know that the thieves on the cross probably didn't drink coffee, but I just thought this was a nice touch. I end up using the cap of my glossy accents and just kind of twisting it into some embossing ink and then using embossing glaze on top of it because it's going to give that kind of wet, clear finish, kind of like liquid would. And so I end up using that to create the circles. And then I'm going to go in with this distress pen that has embossing ink in it. And I'll just kind of make kind of imperfect splatters on the page and add some of that walnut stain distress glaze on top. I end up really liking how this turns out. I'm so glad I tried this and I can't wait to use it in the future. It just adds more life to this ephemera piece. Before it was kind of plain, but just doing something simple like adding these little coffee stains adds so much more to this ephemera piece. Now I decided to put this label on the bottom left-hand corner, but it is still too white. It needs to be kind of antiqued up a little bit, so I end up taking a little bit more frayed burlap to it, and then I will start gluing everything down. So I always start kind of with the back pieces first, and I just keep everything as layered as possible as I start putting pieces down. That helps me so I'm not just blindly putting stuff down because that always ends badly for me. So originally I was going to put that label on some foam tape when I thought it was going to be in the cluster, but now since it's away from the cluster a little bit, I'm just going to end up gluing it down. But instead I'm going to take those florals and add some foam tape to the back of them because that will kind of elevate them and separate them from the cluster. It'll just look more visually appealing when looking at that page. After laying down that floral cluster with some foam tape, I decide I really want a little bit more on this page. And so I end up taking out this fabric that was included as an add-on with this kit. And they had made this with spoon flour and used their florals that they created. And so I just cut a little sliver off. But when I put that to the side, I don't get all the colors that I want. I want more yellows and greens. And so I cut another kind of slice of this fabric up, and I'm just going to fold it a little bit and I'll tuck it in to the side of this last will and testament. Now I already had this glued down and this glue works awesome. So it's very hard to kind of pry up, but all I need is a little tiny bit of prying up to kind of shove that underneath, and I'll add a little bit of glue to hold that. So no need for any staples or stitching on this. It'll just sit in there and hold with glue. Now I like the edges of my fabric to be a little frayed. I just love that imperfection detail, but this fabric was a little tricky to do, so I think it's just because it's such a high quality fabric. So it didn't want to fray as much, but I did get a couple little distressed pieces out, and I stuck that behind my last will and testament, and then I added a bow clip to match on top, and that will be it, guys. If you've liked this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. You can follow me over on Instagram at Wonderfully Made Handcrafting, and I will add the links down below, so if you want any of these products, you can purchase them yourself. I hope you have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.